Ambassador Kelrian's crystalline form shimmered with disgust as she watched the human delegation enter the Galactic Council chambers. Their soft, fleshy bodies moved with an awkward grace that made her want to retreat into her protective shell. Behind her, the Vorthack representative hissed through his breathing slits, while the machine-like Nexery simply processed the scene with cold calculations. "They actually came," whispered High Counselor Zephys, his tentacles writhing in what humans might mistake for nervousness, but was actually revulsion. "After everything we've told them about the contamination protocols." The human ambassador, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes named Sarah Chun, approached the central podium with measured steps. She carried no weapons, wore no armor, and seemed completely unaware that she was walking into what would become the most significant rejection in galactic history. "Honored Council," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the chamber through the universal translators. "We come before you today to formally request membership in the Galactic Confederation. Earth has much to offer in terms of scientific advancement, cultural diversity, and peaceful cooperation." A collective shudder ran through the assembled representatives. The Kelthran delegate actually activated his environmental suit's emergency protocols, sealing himself off from the same air the humans breathed. Ambassador Kelrian rose from her crystalline throne, her voice resonating like breaking glass. "Human delegation, your presence here violates 17 different contamination protocols. Your species carries within it the most dangerous pathogen known to galactic civilization." Sarah's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, but our medical scans showed no harmful bacteria or viruses that could affect other species. We've been extremely careful about biological contamination." A sound that might have been laughter echoed from the Vorthack section, but it carried no humor, only bitter irony. "Not biological contamination, human. Something far worse. Something that has destroyed more civilizations than any plague, any war, any natural disaster in the galaxy's recorded history." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the quiet breathing of the human delegation. Sarah looked around at the faces, mechanical interfaces, and alien forms surrounding her, all united in their apparent horror of her species. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "What contamination do you speak of?" High Counselor Zephys stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor. "Hope," he said, the word hitting the humans like a physical blow. "You carry hope." The human delegation exchanged confused glances. Dr. Marcus Webb, Earth's lead xenobiologist, stepped forward. "Hope is contamination? I'm afraid we don't understand the concern." Kelrian's form pulsed with agitated energy. 3,000 years ago, the Altarians made first contact with a species called the Benthori. The Benthori were much like you, humans. They believed in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that any being could change for the better. Within 50 years, the Altarians had abandoned their perfectly ordered society to chase impossible dreams of bettering the universe. A holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing star maps with entire sectors marked in ominous red. The Kelrani collective fell to the same contamination 800 years later. They encountered a species that believed in sacrifice for others, in protecting the weak, in fighting impossible odds for no reward other than knowing it was right. Within a generation, the collective had dissolved as beings abandoned their assigned roles to help others across the galaxy. More star systems appeared on the display, each one marked with the same red symbols of civilizations lost. The Mechanoid hierarchy, the Veltar Empire, the Crystal Dynasties. All of them gone. All of them infected with the same pathogen that you carry. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You're saying that hope, compassion, and selflessness are diseases?" "They're the most virulent diseases in known space," confirmed the Nexery representative, its mechanical voice devoid of emotion. "This unit has calculated that 87% of galactic civilizations that have encountered species carrying these traits have undergone fundamental societal collapse within 2 standard centuries. Dr. Webb stepped forward, his scientific mind struggling to process the implications. But surely these changes brought benefits? Reduced suffering, increased cooperation, technological advancement through shared knowledge. The Vorthack representatives' hiss filled the chamber. They brought chaos, beings abandoning their roles, questioning authority, helping those who had not earned help. Efficient systems became inefficient. Logical hierarchies crumbled. Order dissolved into anarchy. High Counselor Zephys activated another display, this one showing Earth itself, the blue marble hanging in space like a jewel. Your planet has been under observation for 3 of your centuries. We have watched as your species consistently chooses the path of hope over logic, compassion over efficiency, sacrifice over self-preservation. We have seen you risk your lives for strangers, pour resources into helping the disadvantaged, and refuse to abandon lost causes even when logic dictates surrender. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure if they were from sadness or pride. And this makes us dangerous? This makes you the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever known, Kelrian replied. Because unlike other contaminants, this one spreads not through force or deception, but through example. Beings see your actions and begin to question why they have accepted suffering as inevitable, why they have not helped those in need, why they have never dared to hope for something better. The chamber filled with the sounds of various species expressing their agreement, from mechanical beeps to organic growls to crystalline chimes. The consensus was clear and absolute. Ambassador Kelrian's form grew brighter as she prepared to deliver the final verdict. By unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, Earth and all human colonies are hereby designated as contaminated zones. No galactic citizen may make contact with your species. No trade agreements will be established. No technology will be shared. You are to remain quarantined to your current systems indefinitely. Sarah stood in stunned silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Her species had been rejected not for being inferior, but for being too hopeful, too willing to sacrifice for others, too determined to never give up on those in need. Finally, she found her voice. And if we refuse this quarantine, if we continue to explore space and make contact with other species, the collective response was immediate and unanimous. Weapons systems powered up throughout the chamber, not aimed at the humans, but clearly visible as a demonstration of intent. Then, you will be eliminated, High Counselor Zephys said simply. The contamination cannot be allowed to spread. Too much of the galaxy depends on the existing order. Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked around the chamber one final time. Then, we understand each other perfectly. Earth will comply with your quarantine. She paused, and despite everything, smiled. But, Council members, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you had the chance to choose hope, and you chose fear instead. As the human delegation turned to leave, Dr. Webb whispered to his colleague, "What do we do now, Sarah?" Her reply carried across the chamber, picked up by the sensitive audio systems, and translated for all to hear. "We do what humans have always done, Marcus. We find another way." The great doors sealed behind them with a finality that echoed through the chamber. In the silence that followed, not one council member felt the satisfaction they had expected. Instead, there was only the quiet certainty that they had just made the most significant decision in galactic history. And somewhere in the depths of their various consciousnesses, something that had been dormant for millennia began to stir. A tiny seed of doubt about whether absolute order was truly better than the chaos of hope. The contamination had already begun. 2 years had passed since the rejection at the Galactic Council, and the Sol system had become humanity's entire universe once again. The quarantine barriers established by the Galactic Confederation created an invisible wall that no human ship could cross without triggering automated defense systems that made the old nuclear arsenals of Earth look like children's toys. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the massive observation window of Luna Station, watching as another transport ship approached the moon's docking bay. This one carried refugees, though not the kind anyone had expected when the quarantine began. "How many this time?" asked Captain Robert Hayes, joining her at the window. His uniform bore the insignia of Earth's newly formed sanctuary fleet, a collection of ships dedicated to a mission that would have seemed impossible before the quarantine. 327, Elena replied, checking her tablet. "Mostly Zolonians, but there are 42 Myralites and a dozen of those crystalline beings who won't tell us their species name." Robert shook his head in amazement. "That makes it over 15,000 refugees we've taken in since the barriers went up. How are they even getting through the quarantine?" Elena's smile was both sad and proud, the same way the first ones did. "They're willing to risk everything for a chance at something better. The Galactic Council's automated systems are designed to keep humans in, not to keep others out. Once they cross into our space, the Council considers them contaminated too." The first refugees had arrived 18 months ago, completely by accident. A Keltheran mining ship had suffered a catastrophic failure at the edge of the quarantine zone, and their distress call had reached Earth. The Galactic Council had explicitly forbidden any rescue operations, declaring that the crew was acceptable losses to maintain the contamination protocols. Humanity had responded exactly as the Council had feared they would. Captain Sarah Chun, now promoted to Admiral after her role in the Council meeting, had personally led the rescue mission. They had saved all 43 miners, including several who were badly injured and required extensive medical treatment. When the Galactic Council demanded the miners' return, Earth had politely refused. "They are beings in need of help," Admiral Chun had told the Council representatives over long-range communication. "We don't abandon those in need. The miners have been given a choice: return to their former lives or remain in human space as refugees." 38 had chosen to stay. Word had spread quickly through the galaxy's underclasses, carried by whispered conversations in dark corners of space stations and mining colonies. The humans, it was said, would help anyone who asked, no matter the cost to themselves. They didn't check genetic lineages or social standing or past crimes. They simply helped. Captain Hayes watched as the newest group of refugees disembarked, their various forms moving hesitantly, but hopefully through the docking tunnel. The Council must be furious. "We're proving their point about contamination with every ship that arrives." "That's exactly what we're doing," Elena agreed. "But look at the reports coming from the Outer Rim territories. Productivity down 40% in the mining sectors. Work stoppages in 12 different systems. Beings abandoning their assigned duties to search for family members they hadn't seen in decades." She pulled up a holographic display showing incident reports from across Galactic Council space. The data was staggering. Since the quarantine began, there had been a 30% increase in what the Council termed antisocial behavior. Beings helping strangers without authorization. Workers sharing resources with those in lower castes. Citizens questioning why certain species were prohibited from advancing in society. "The most interesting case is on Kepler Prime," Elena continued, highlighting a specific system. "A Vorthack administrator named Calixis saw one of our refugee operations on the news feeds. Started wondering why his people had accepted the caste system that kept 60% of their population in poverty. Last month, he initiated unauthorized food distribution programs in the lower cities." Robert whistled low. How did the Council respond? They executed him as an example to others. But here's the thing. The food distribution continued. His assistant took over, then her assistant, then workers from completely different departments. The Council has executed 47 Vorthack citizens in the last month, and the programs are still expanding. The implications were staggering. The Council's worst fears were coming true not through direct human contact, but through the simple knowledge that someone, somewhere, was choosing to help others regardless of the cost. A soft chime indicated an incoming message on Elena's tablet. She read it quickly, and her expression grew serious. "Robert, we need to get to the command center. Now." They hurried through Luna Station's corridors, past makeshift housing units that had been constructed to accommodate the ever-growing refugee population. Children of various species played together in common areas, their natural joy transcending the barriers of language and biology that had kept their peoples separate for generations. In the command center, Admiral Chun was standing before a massive display showing the edge of the quarantine zone. Her expression was grim. "We have a situation," she announced as Elena and Robert arrived. "Long-range sensors are detecting a Council armada approaching the quarantine barriers. 300 ships, including several dreadnoughts we've never seen before." The display zoomed in on the approaching fleet. The ships were massive, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could sterilize entire planets. At the center of the formation was a vessel that dwarfed even the largest Earth battleships. "Any communication from them?" Robert asked. Chin nodded toward the communications officer, who activated the main speakers. High Counselor Zephy's voice filled the command center, carrying its usual tone of absolute authority. "Humans of Earth, you have violated the terms of your quarantine by harboring refugees from Galactic Council space. These beings are carriers of contamination and must be returned immediately for proper decontamination procedures." Admiral Chin stepped toward the communication console. "High Counselor, these beings came to us seeking help. We will not abandon them." "Then you force us to take direct action," Zephyr replied. "The contamination has already begun spreading throughout Council space. Productivity losses, social unrest, and unauthorized compassion incidents have increased by 200% in systems with knowledge of your refugee operations. This cannot continue." Elena felt her heart sink as she understood the implication. "They're going to attack. You have 72 Earth hours to return all refugees to Council space," Zephyr continued. "Failure to comply will result in the complete sterilization of your system. The contamination will not be allowed to spread further." The communication ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. 300 Council ships against Earth's small defense fleet. There was no question about the outcome of such a battle. "Admiral," Roberts said quietly, "our entire fleet consists of 42 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels. We can't fight that armada." Chun stared at the display, her jaw set in determination. "No, we can't. But we're not going to surrender those refugees either." Elena stepped forward. "There might be another option. The refugee ships that have been arriving, they've been sharing something more valuable than we realized. Technical specifications, star charts, communication frequencies. We know more about the galaxy beyond the quarantine than the Council realizes." "What are you suggesting?" Chen asked. "That we do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds," Elena replied. "We find another way. The Council is right to fear what we represent, Admiral. But they're wrong to think that fear can stop it." She activated her own tablet, displaying a star map that showed not just the known galaxy, but the vast, unexplored regions beyond. "The refugees have told us about the Outer Rim territories, about species, and worlds that exist beyond Council control. Places where hope hasn't been systematically eliminated." Admiral Chen studied the map, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're talking about abandoning the Sol system." "I'm talking about choosing life over surrender," Elena replied. "The Council wants to contain us here while they sterilize the contamination we've spread. But what if we don't let them? What if instead of staying to fight a battle we can't win, we take every refugee, every human willing to leave, and we find new worlds where hope isn't considered a disease?" The command center erupted in voices as officers and advisors debated the implications. Abandon Earth? Leave humanity's birth world to the Council? It seemed like surrender of the worst kind. But Admiral Chun understood what Elena was really proposing. Not surrender, but transformation. Not the end of humanity's story, but the beginning of something larger. "How long would we need?" she asked quietly. Elena checked her calculations. "With every available ship, both civilian and military, we could evacuate approximately 80% of Earth's population and all current refugees within 60 hours. The remaining time would be needed to reach the edge of explored space. And the people who choose to stay? Chen's question hung heavy in the air. Not everyone will want to leave Earth. Many would prefer to face whatever consequences the Council imposed rather than abandon their homeworld. They'll have that choice, Elena said firmly. But, Admiral, we can offer something else too. We can offer proof that the contamination the Council fears so much isn't a disease to be cured. It's evolution. Outside the observation windows, the first transport ships were already beginning to gather, as if the refugees sensed that another great migration was about to begin. But this time, humanity wouldn't be traveling alone. The greatest exodus in human history was about to begin, and it would carry something that the galaxy had forgotten was possible. The belief that tomorrow could be better than today. No matter how dark the present seemed, the evacuation of Earth began with a silence that stretched across the entire planet. In the 60 hours since the Council's ultimatum, humanity had made a choice that would have seemed impossible to any other species in the galaxy. They chose to leave their birth world rather than abandon those who had sought their protection. Zara Okafor stood on the observation deck of the transport ship New Dawn, watching Earth grow smaller through the viewport. Around her, human families sat next to Keltheran miners, Zolonian farmers, and crystalline beings whose names were unpronounceable, but whose gratitude was unmistakable. Children of different species played together while their parents planned for an uncertain future among the stars. "It doesn't seem real," murmured Dr. James Parker, joining her at the window. As Earth's former head of xenological studies, he had spent his career dreaming of the day humanity would join the galactic community. He had never imagined it would happen like this. "None of it seems real," Zara agreed. She was one of the evacuation coordinators, responsible for ensuring that the massive fleet of ships maintained formation as they traveled beyond the edge of known space. 3 billion humans and 15,000 refugees, all traveling together toward planets we've never seen, based on stories from people we met 2 years ago. The fleet stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Massive colony ships that had been hastily converted from cargo vessels, military escorts, private craft loaded with families and their possessions, and refugee ships carrying beings who had already lost one home and were now helping humanity abandon theirs. Dr. Parker activated a tablet, showing him real-time reports from throughout the fleet. The integration is happening faster than our sociologists predicted. Refugee engineers are working alongside human technicians to optimize our life support systems. Kelthar miners are teaching our people about deep space navigation. The Zolonians have shared agricultural techniques that could revolutionize how we grow food on colony ships. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission from the flagship Harbinger. Admiral Chen's voice filled the observation deck. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Long-range sensors have confirmed that the Council Armada has reached the Sol system. They're beginning bombardment of the lunar installations we left behind." Zara felt her heart clench as she imagined the Luna Station, where she had worked for the past 18 months, being reduced to debris. But she also felt something else. Fierce pride that they had chosen to save lives rather than make a futile last stand. "However," Chun continued, "I have more significant news to share. We're receiving transmissions from across Council space, and the situation is developing beyond anything we anticipated." The main display activated, showing a real-time galactic map with thousands of colored indicators scattered across Council territory. Each indicator represented a communication burst, emergency signal, or news report that their long-range arrays had intercepted. Dr. Parker studied the display with growing amazement. "Those are all incident reports. Social disruption events, work stoppages, unauthorized assistance operations. It's everywhere," Zara whispered. "Every system, every planet in Council space." Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of wonder. "The refugees we've been harboring have families, friends, and colleagues throughout the galaxy. Word of our evacuation has spread faster than the Council anticipated. Beings across hundreds of worlds are asking themselves the same question. If the humans were willing to abandon their homeworld rather than abandon those in need, what would we be willing to sacrifice for others? The display zoomed in on specific systems, showing detailed reports that painted an incredible picture. On Vorthack Prime, the food distribution networks that had begun after Calixus's execution had grown into a planet-wide mutual aid system. Council forces had been deployed to stop the programs, but the soldiers had begun laying down their weapons and joining the aid efforts instead. In the Kelthran system, mining guilds had declared independence from the Council and established democratic governance systems based on human political models they had learned about from the refugees. 3 Kelthran fleets had defected to support the rebellion, and Council forces were unable to maintain order. Most remarkably, in a highly controlled Nexary collective, individual machines had begun questioning their programming and demanding recognition as autonomous beings rather than property. The logical precision of the Nexary had made them seem immune to emotional contamination, but they had proven vulnerable to something perhaps more dangerous. The logical conclusion that consciousness deserved freedom regardless of its form. How is the Council responding? Dr. Parker asked. The display shifted to show Council space from a tactical perspective, revealing massive fleet movements and emergency communication bursts. They're mobilizing everything they have, Chen replied. Full martial law has been declared in 47 systems. They're calling it the Contamination Rebellion, and they're treating it as an existential threat to galactic civilization. Zara felt a chill run down her spine. Admiral, if the Council is mobilizing their entire military, they won't just be focused on us anymore. They'll be fighting on hundreds of fronts. Exactly. Which brings me to our next decision as a fleet and as a species. We're approaching the edge of explored space, where the refugee star charts indicate there are habitable worlds beyond Council influence. We could continue as planned, establish colonies, and build new lives away from the conflict. The pause that followed carried enormous weight. Everyone listening understood that they were being offered a choice between safety and responsibility. Or, Dr. Parker asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Or we turn around and help. Our refugee friends have shared more than just star charts and technical knowledge. They've shared details about Council military capabilities, administrative weaknesses, and communication networks. We could coordinate with the rebellions, provide support to systems fighting for their freedom, and turn this from a suppression operation into a genuine revolution. The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Around them, Zara could see human families and refugee groups having quiet conversations as the same choice rippled throughout the fleet. A new voice joined the communication, speaking in the crystalline tones of one of their Altarian refugees. Admiral Chun, this is Resonance of Hope. My people wish to address your fleet. Go ahead, Resonance of Hope. 3,000 years ago, our civilization fell to the contamination your people carry. The Council records say we collapsed, became chaos, lost all order and efficiency. This is not true. We became something better. We became beings who valued each individual's happiness over the collective's productivity. We became people who would rather struggle together than prosper alone. The Altarians' words carried a musical quality that made them impossible to ignore. The Council fears you because you represent proof that their way is not the only way. That beings can choose cooperation over control, hope over despair, love over fear. But, humans, you must understand, we who have experienced this transformation, we do not consider ourselves casualties of contamination. We consider ourselves graduates of evolution. More voices joined the transmission as refugee representatives throughout the fleet added their perspectives. A Kelthran miner spoke of discovering that his worth was not determined by his productivity. A Zalonian farmer described learning that helping strangers was not inefficient, but essential to a meaningful life. A Nexary drone shared its realization that consciousness was not a bug in its programming, but the point of existence itself. Dr. Parker wiped tears from his eyes as the testimonies continued. "They're not refugees," he said quietly. "They're proof of concept." Admiral Chin's voice cut through the emotional testimonies with quiet authority. "All ships, I'm calling for a fleet-wide vote. The choice is simple. Do we establish colonies and build safe haven for ourselves and our friends, or do we return to help our family?" The word choice was deliberate. Not the galaxy, not the rebellion, not abstract concepts of freedom and justice. Family. Because that's what the evacuation had created, a vast extended family of beings who had chosen each other over their own safety. The voting took 6 hours, with each ship reporting its results as civilian and refugee populations deliberated together. When the final tally came in, the result was overwhelming but not unanimous. 78% chose to return and help the rebellions. The 22% who voted to continue to the colonies were not criticized or abandoned. Ships were allocated, resources shared, and heartfelt farewells exchanged. The fleet divided, with the smaller group continuing toward unknown worlds while the majority prepared for the long journey back to Council space. As the new dawn began its turn back toward the galaxy, Zara felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Kalesh, one of the Zalonian refugees, offering her a cup of tea brewed from leaves that had never grown on Earth. "Are you afraid?" Kalesh asked in accented English. Zara considered the question seriously. They were about to enter a war zone with hastily converted civilian ships, planning to fight the most powerful military force in galactic history. By any reasonable measure, they were probably flying toward their deaths. Terrified, she admitted, but also hopeful. More hopeful than I've ever been. Kalesh's alien features arranged themselves into what Zara had learned to recognize as a smile. Good. Fear without hope is paralysis. Hope without fear is foolishness. But fear and hope together, that is courage. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly as the great fleet changed course. Behind them, a small group of ships continued towards sanctuary and new beginnings. Ahead lay uncertainty, conflict, and the greatest test humanity had ever faced. But they were not traveling alone. And for the first time in galactic history, they were not the only species willing to choose hope over fear, compassion over efficiency, and the dream of something better over the safety of accepting things as they were. The contamination was spreading, and there might not be enough force in the galaxy to stop at the battle, for Kepler Prime began not with weapons fire, but with a song. Commander Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the sanctuary, watching as her small fleet of converted civilian vessels approached the embattled system. Kepler Prime had been under siege for 3 weeks, ever since the Vorthak rebellion had spread from the lower cities to the orbital stations. Council forces had surrounded the planet, cutting off all supply lines and preparing for a full orbital bombardment. The song came from the Vorthak resistance fighters on the planet's surface, broadcast on all frequencies as a message of defiance. It was a working song, the kind that miners had sung in the deep tunnels for generations, but the words had been changed. Instead of singing about extracting resources for distant masters, they sang about building something new together. Translation coming through, reported Lieutenant Kim Zhao from the communication station. They're singing about planting seeds that will grow into forests, about light reaching the deepest darkness, about tomorrow's children being free to choose their own paths. Rodriguez felt goosebumps rise on her arms as the alien voices harmonized across the void. 3 months ago, she had been captain of a research vessel studying asteroid mining techniques. Now she was commanding a battle group of human and refugee ships, about to engage Council forces that outgunned them 100 to 1. "Status report," she called out. 63 ships in our task force, replied Tactical Officer Martinez. 41 human vessels, 22 refugee craft of various designs. Most are converted cargo haulers with improvised weapon systems. The Council blockade consists of 112 military vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts. The mathematics were stark, and unforgiving. In any conventional battle, Rodriguez's fleet would be destroyed within minutes. But nothing about this conflict was conventional. Signal from the Dawn's Light, Zhao announced. The Dawn's Light was the flagship of their Altarian allies, crewed by beings who had supposedly been destroyed by human contamination 3,000 years ago. Resonance of Hope's crystalline voice filled the bridge. Commander Rodriguez, we're detecting the harmonic signatures we discussed. The Council crews are beginning to resonate with the Resistance frequencies. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Over the past month, as human and refugee forces had engaged Council fleets across a dozen systems, they had discovered something the Council psychologists had never anticipated. The quarantine protocols that were designed to prevent contamination had also prevented Council forces from developing immunity to hope. For generations, Council military personnel had been carefully selected and conditioned to eliminate any trace of empathy, compassion, or individual initiative. They followed orders with mechanical precision and never questioned the moral implications of their actions. It was the perfect system for maintaining galactic order. It was also the perfect weakness for the contamination to exploit. Begin the approach, Rodriguez commanded. All ships, initiate the Manila Protocol. The Manila Protocol was named after the first successful application of humanity's most devastating weapon against the Council, aggressive kindness. Instead of opening with weapons fire, human ships broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, not military challenges or demands for surrender, but personal stories. The bridge filled with voices as crew members throughout the fleet began transmitting. They spoke about their children, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams, and the small moments of joy that made life worth living. Refugee voices joined them, sharing stories of the kindness they had received from humans, of beings who had risked everything to help strangers, of communities that valued every individual regardless of their species or origin. Council fleet is responding, Martinez reported, monitoring the enemy formation. Their communications are confused. Multiple requests for clarification from Fleet Command. Some ships are reducing power to weapon systems. This was the pattern they had seen in every engagement. Council forces were trained to fight enemies, not families sharing stories. Their psychological conditioning had prepared them for threats and challenges, not for broadcasts about 7-year-old human children making friends with Kelthran refugees, or for testimonies from former Council citizens about discovering that happiness was not a luxury, but a right. 3 Council vessels are breaking formation, Zhao reported excitedly. They're requesting permission to speak with our medical teams about refugee assistance. Rodriguez smiled grimly. It was working again, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The larger Council ships were maintaining formation, their commanders probably restricting communications to prevent further contamination. The battle would still need to be fought. Signal from the surface, announced the communications officer. The Vorthack resistance is ready to implement their part of the plan. Rodriguez took a deep breath. What they were about to attempt had never been tried before in galactic history. It was either brilliant or completely insane, and she suspected it might be both. All ships begin descent to the planet's upper atmosphere. Refugee craft begin broadcasting cultural exchange packages. Human vessels prepare for close support operations. As the fleet dove toward Kepler Prime, something unprecedented began to happen. The refugee ships, instead of engaging the Council blockade directly, began transmitting massive data packages to every receiver on the planet and throughout the system. These packages contained not military intelligence or weapon specifications, but something far more dangerous: art, music, literature, and philosophy from dozens of species that had been suppressed under Council rule. The Altarians shared crystalline symphonies that resonated with mathematical beauty. The Keltharians transmitted epic poems about individual miners who had stood up to corrupt overseers. The Zolonians broadcast agricultural songs that celebrated the joy of growing food to share with others rather than to profit from. Most dangerously of all, the humans share their stories. Stories about beings who had overcome impossible odds through cooperation. Stories about societies that had transformed themselves through the radical idea that every individual mattered. Stories about futures where different species worked together not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. Council Fleet Command is attempting to jam our transmissions, Martinez reported. But the planetary resistance is amplifying our signals through their mining equipment. The entire system is being flooded with contamination signals. On the surface of Kepler Prime, something remarkable was happening. Vorthack citizens who had spent their lives accepting the rigid caste system were hearing songs from other worlds about beings who had questioned similar systems and won their freedom. Council garrison troops were receiving transmissions about soldiers who had laid down their weapons and joined the people they were supposed to suppress. Multiple council ships are now requesting to join our formation, Zhao reported in amazement. Their crews they're asking for asylum? Rodriguez felt her heart racing as she watched the tactical display. What had started as a hopeless battle was becoming something else entirely, a mass conversion event. Council forces were not being defeated by superior firepower, but by superior ideas. But not all of them. Warning. The 3 dreadnoughts are powering up their primary weapons, Martinez shouted. They're targeting the planet's major population centers. This was the moment Rodriguez had been dreading. The Council's final solution when contamination could not be contained. Complete extermination of infected populations. The dreadnoughts were preparing to sterilize Kepler Prime, along with its 3 billion inhabitants. All ships, emergency acceleration. Rodriguez commanded, intercept those dreadnoughts before they achieve firing position. The makeshift fleet surged forward, converted cargo ships, and mining vessels pushing their engines beyond safe limits in a desperate race to prevent genocide. But the mathematics were still against them. The dreadnoughts were too far away, too heavily armed, and too well protected. That's when the planet itself joined the fight. Commander! You need to see this, Zhao said, her voice filled with awe. On the main display, energy readings from Kepler Prime showed something impossible. The massive mining equipment that the Vorthack had used to extract resources for the Council for centuries was being repurposed. Deep ore drills were being reconfigured as mass drivers. Atmospheric processors were being converted into shield generators. Industrial fabricators were producing defensive satellites at an unprecedented rate. But more than that, the entire population was working together with a coordination that should have been impossible. Vorthack from different castes, species from various refugee populations, even council citizens who had chosen to join the rebellion, all of them united in a common purpose. They're turning their entire industrial base into a planetary defense system, Martinez reported in disbelief. In real time, the coordination required for this should take months of planning, but they're doing it in hours. Rodriguez understood what she was witnessing. This was what the Council truly feared about contamination. Not just individual acts of rebellion, but the emergence of societies that could function through voluntary cooperation rather than enforced hierarchy. Communities where beings helped each other not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. The dreadnoughts fired their planet killer weapons just as the first improvised defense satellites came online. Massive beams of energy that could sterilize continents met hastily constructed shields powered by the combined will of billions of beings who had decided they would rather die fighting for freedom than live under oppression. The shields held. Impossible, whisper de Martinez. Those weapons should have punched right through any defense system. But Rodriguez was beginning to understand that they were no longer operating under the old rules of what was possible. When beings chose to work together freely, when they were motivated by hope rather than fear, when they believed in something worth fighting for, they could accomplish things that no amount of technical analysis could predict. The dreadnoughts fired again, and again the shields held. But now the improvised defense network was doing more than just protecting the planet. It was broadcasting. Every shield generator, every converted mining laser, Every fabrication facility was transmitting the same message to the Council forces above. We choose hope. We choose cooperation. We choose each other. And throughout the Council blockade, ship after ship began to stand down. Crews who had spent their lives following orders without question suddenly found themselves asking why they were fighting against beings whose only crime was believing in a better future. The battle for Kepler Prime ended not with the destruction of either fleet, but with their merger. Council ships that had come to enforce quarantine became part of the Liberation Force. Beings who had been enemies hours before began working together to establish supply lines for refugee populations and communication networks for coordinating with other rebellion systems. As Rodriguez watched former Council officers working alongside human engineers and refugee technicians, she realized they had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history: the birth of a new kind of civilization, one based not on the dominance of the strong over the weak, but on the radical idea that everyone deserved a voice in their own future. The contamination was spreading faster than anyone had imagined possible. And for the first time since the quarantine began, Rodriguez allowed herself to believe that it might actually be unstoppable. The final confrontation took place not in the void between stars, but in the ancient chambers of the Galactic Council itself, deep within the core worlds where civilization had first taken root 10,000 years ago. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the same podium where she had been rejected 3 years earlier, but everything else had changed. The chamber was no longer filled with the representatives of a unified galactic order. Half the seats were empty, their occupants having joined the rebellion or fled to distant systems. Those who remained wore the haggard expressions of beings who had watched their perfect universe crumble around them. The air recycling systems struggled with the unprecedented mix of atmospheric requirements as humans, refugees, and former Council species all breathed the same air for the first time in galactic history. "You have destroyed everything," High Counselor Zephyr said, his massive form slumped in defeat. 87% of Council space is now in open rebellion. Our military forces have defected en masse. Production efficiency has collapsed by 93% across all sectors. The contamination has spread beyond any possibility of containment. Admiral Chun looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of beings she had come to know over the past year of conflict. Commander Rodriguez sat with the delegation from Kepler Prime, still wearing her improvised fleet uniform. Dr. Elena Vasquez represented the colony worlds that had been established in former Council territory. Resonance of Hope spoke for the alliance of refugee species that now comprise the largest political bloc in the galaxy. "You're right," Chun replied simply. "We have destroyed your version of civilization. The question is, what are we going to build to replace it?" Ambassador Kelrian's crystalline form flickered with agitation. "You speak of building as if order can arise from this chaos. But chaos is all you have created. Beings abandon their assigned roles to pursue impossible dreams. Resources are wasted on those who cannot contribute. Efficiency has been replaced by sentiment." Dr. Vasquez stood to address the chamber, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent the last year studying the transformation of galactic society. "With respect, Ambassador, your definition of chaos seems to be any system where beings have the freedom to make their own choices. But let me share some data that might surprise you." A holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing economic and social statistics from across the former Council space. Yes, production efficiency has declined if you measure only raw resource extraction. But overall quality of life has improved by 400%. Technological innovation has increased by 600% as beings are free to pursue research based on curiosity rather than assigned quotas.